これをさらに応用いたしまして、日本から続々と探査機を月表面に送り込みたいと考えております。具体的には月極域探査、ルペックスローバーであるとか、宇宙飛行士を活動させるための有人与圧ローバーといったものが計画されております。月に進出するのみならず、火星探査におきましてこの技術は応用される見込みになってございます。ここで新しい技術を獲得することによって、ますます日本は自由自在に宇宙で活動することができることになろうと考えているものです。これからも JAXA 宇宙科学研究所は挑戦をし続けます。
We will now discuss more about the moon landing with SLIM with our guests on this broadcast. Our first guest is from the SLIM project team, Mori Osamu, in the Department of Interdisciplinary Space Science here at ISIS JAXA. Mori-san is going to start by giving us an overview of the SLIM mission.
はい、それでは森さんには、スリムの概要であるとか、それから打ち上げからここまでの経緯について、解説をしていただきたいと思います。よろしくお願いします。はい。
We're going to share some slides. Here we go. So, from an era of landing where we can, we're going to move with SLIM to an era of landing where we want. So the SLIM mission has two main objectives. Objective A is a technology demonstration of a high-precision pinpoint landing on the moon. With a soft landing by SLIM, Japan will be the fifth country to land on the moon after the Soviet Union, USA, China and India. But the landing precision will be the highest in the world. So conventional lunar landers actually have a landing accuracy of several to tens kilometers, whereas SLIM is aiming for a landing accuracy of only about 100 meters. And this technology is necessary for the era of full-scale lunar surface exploration activities where we want to control very precisely where we're going. The second objective, Objective B of the SLIM mission, is the realization of a lightweight lunar planetary probe system. So SLIM includes innovative weight reduction through improvements to the spacecraft structure, chemical propulsion system, power supply and orbit. And this will lead the development of a lightweight lunar probe will lead to the ability to have an increased payload for missions, such as, for example, sample return missions from the Earth or to Mars, or really anywhere else, because you have more of that weight available for instruments. So from here we're going to look a little bit more at SLIM's configuration and some of the components that allowed it to be such a lightweight spacecraft. So here we have the SLIM configuration itself. The mass of SLIM is 190 kilograms when it's in what we call a dry condition, that is, there's no fuel. And it's 710 kilograms when it's wet, so this is at launch when it's fully fueled. And you can see the features of SLIM's design in these images, such as, for example, the thin film solar cells that stretch across the body of SLIM, and the navigation cameras that, as we'll see a bit later, are a key component to SLIM's pinpoint landing mechanism. You can also spot the two main thrusters of the main engine and the smaller auxiliary thrusters, of which there's 12 around the outside, and SLIM's feet on the right here, which are the small shock-absorbing meshes. So here we have a bit more of SLIM's structural design. Top to bottom here in Japanese is written the PAF rings, which couple to the rocket. After that there's the tank, which is also used as a structural base of the spacecraft. Below that, there's the deck panels with the landing sensors mounted on them. Below that again, there's the RCS panel, which has the thrusters. Then we have the electrical equipment box and the instrument box with the scientific observation camera. So one of the innovative things here is actually SLIM's tank, because it's this integrated dual oxidizer tank that reduces weight, and then the cylindrical tank itself forms the structural base of the spacecraft, which also significantly contributes to an overall mass reduction of that spacecraft. Now the bottom part of the slide shows the attitude of SLIM during landing. From about 50 meters above the surface, SLIM will rotate to a vertical position and start to descend. But just before landing, SLIM will lean forward so that its lean forward so its rearmost leg touches the surface first. Then the spacecraft tips forward onto its front two legs before stabilizing into this horizontal position. And in the bottom right here, we have the mascot Slim Moon, which you'll often see on our Twitter feed, slim_JAXA. And now we're going to turn to the design actually of the SLIM tank, the chemical propulsion system. Now, as I previously mentioned, this is an integrated fuel and oxidizer tank, which is designed to reduce the spacecraft weight. If you look at that sketch in the top middle of the slide, you actually have the oxidizer in the blue part at the top. The propellant fuel is in the bottom, and there's helium gas in between. And a lightweight diaphragm separates out these sections, and this is newly developed. It's made of PTFE, which I believe stands for polytetrafluoroethylene, and it's part of the new development for SLIM. So the main engine is actually seen at the bottom left of the slide, and it uses a ceramic combustion chamber that was actually developed here in Japan. And it's designed to use an impressive combination of a wide thrust range and pulse operation. It's not been found anywhere else so far. The high performance also helps the overall mass reduction of the propulsion system. And then on the bottom right, we have the auxiliary thrusters, which have a thrust of about 20 newtons. This is a 12-unit configuration. And by making a different pattern of thrusters fire at different times, you actually control the spacecraft attitude, orbit maneuver, and precise landing. Now we're taking a look at the power supply of the spacecraft. So at the top here we have the solar batteries. These are thin-filmed triple-junction solar cell sheets. They're lightweight, they're flexible, and they're highly efficient on curved surfaces such as the SLIM tank. Below that we have the batteries, the lithium-ion battery. The outer casing is made of stainless steel. There's two sets of these cells that are bound by carbon fibre reinforced plastic CFRP plates, and these are designed to stand vibration and impacts during launch, as well as charging and discharging in a vacuum environment. And then right at the bottom we have the integrated power control unit. This handles functions like solar power generation, the power distribution, heater control, battery charge and discharge, and thruster valve operation. So this is actually SLIM's orbit, which performed what we actually call a swing-by orbit, which means it reached the moon. It launched in September, and we actually reached the moon as early as October, at the beginning of that month. But rather than stopping there, we actually swung outwards, and this is the idea behind the swing-by orbit, going to a rather staggering distance of about 1.38 million kilometers from the Earth, before turning back and returning to the moon, where we intercepted again and went into orbit on Christmas Day. There SLIM goes, and there's the swing by. And then we started coming back towards the moon on the 6th of November before going into lunar orbit. So the advantage of this swing-by orbit is rather counterintuitively, it saves a lot of fuel, because while it's a very long distance, when you reach these very far distances from the Earth and Moon, you can actually use the gravity of the Sun, Moon and Earth to bring you back towards the Moon without exerting a lot of thruster fuel. So it's long, but it's efficient. Now once we entered into orbit on Christmas Day, we started to change the orbit to become more circular. SLIM entered originally an elliptical orbit, and then passing between 4,000 kilometers and 600 kilometers from the lunar surface, and then it became more circular and has gradually been lowering since then. So let's look at the demonstration of the technology needed for high precision landing, this pinpoint landing on the moon.
日差す日照の観点で、そのスリムは月面のどういった地点に着陸することになるんでしょうか。
はい、
So how does SLIM actually do this very accurate landing?
タイミングは月の明け方ですねに着陸します。ですのでなんですかね、水平のところから太陽の光が入ってくることになりますので、なかなか太陽電池で発電するのは難しいという問題が出てきます。ですのでこちらですね、着陸姿勢よく見ていただくと斜めになっているのがわかると思いますが、これ横から光が入ってきて
Oh, we've gone back to look at the spacecraft design again, and in particular these solar panels, which are flexible and fold around the fuel tank as opposed to being the flat wings that you normally see with conventional spacecraft. This is very efficient for space, among other things.
This is because SLIM will be landing in the morning and it needs more sunlight, so it has to be tilted.
厳しいかもしれません。どのくらい持つかっていうのは実際やってみないとわからないという形になります。
なるほど、その熱の観点から厳しいというところもあるかもしれないけれども、これから見ていく。はい、
そうですね。
はい。で、スリムはこれからいよいよ月着陸を行うことになるわけなんですが、その流れをご説明いただけますでしょうか。はい。ではこちらのスライドですね。
Okay, now we are going to go and look at the technology for the high precision landing, and in particular this pinpoint landing technique.
ちょっとまずはミッション全体を見ていただければと思います。
This is the mission movie for SLIM. We're going to do a run through from the launch through to arriving at the moon. So this is a spacecraft separation. And then the first step is both an Earth swing by, where we use the gravity of the Earth to give us a kick in the right direction. And this is followed by the lunar swing by that we mentioned earlier, where we actually pass the moon and go out to a much further distance in order to use the gravity of the Earth-Moon-Sun system to pull us back. And now we're observations from lunar orbit. This is part of the vision-based navigation using the onboard cameras. So SLIM's cameras scan the ground beneath it on the lunar surface and identify craters, which help SLIM know where it is. Now we rotate to a vertical position as we prepare for landing. And SLIM starts scanning the ground again, this time looking for obstacles that would actually be dangerous to the spacecraft should it land directly on them, for example, large boulders. And if it spots a large boulder, it moves horizontally in order to avoid that boulder and to earn open space. And then just before landing, it's going to release the spacecraft's two rovers, LEV 1 and LEV 2. And then here is the two-step landing where we land on that back lead first and then tip forward onto the front landing gear. These are the two rovers, LEV 1 and LEV 2. And this is the movement of LEV 1, which is a hop. And this is LEV 2, the little ball rover. We'll talk a little more about that later. It springs open to actually have a wheeled format, so it will be moving along the lunar surface with wheels. And SLIM is also equipped with a near-infrared multi-band camera, and it will take observations from there. So now starts with a powered descent from an altitude of 15 kilometers and approaches the target point on the lunar surface using this image matching. At an altitude of 7 kilometers, the spacecraft will transition to a vertical descent, and precise measurements of the altitude will be taken with the landing radar. And then finally, the two-step landing with the autonomous obstacle detection that we saw in the movie will be performed before we're safely on the ground. And the maximum, during the power descent phase, the maximum velocity is 1700 meters per second, and that is about 7 times the speed of a passenger aircraft. And this whole thing will take about 20 minutes, which is sometimes known by the team as 20 minutes of terror. So how do you actually know where you are on the lunar surface to do these pinpoint landings? Unfortunately, unlike the Earth, there is no GPS on the moon. GPS devices do not work. So therefore, we need to use other ways to find our location over the lunar surface. Now, conventional landers plot their trajectory from the Earth, And then they use their inertial navigation equipment, such as the accelerometers and the gyro sensors, to work out where they are. And then this allows them to find roughly their target location and land. However, those techniques are not particularly accurate, and little measurement errors add up all the way through to end up as a result with quite a large landing area with these conventional techniques. So in order to improve this, what we do is we add in this image matching scheme, which allows SLIM to have a much better assessment of where it is on that lunar surface by using its navigation cameras to photograph the pattern of craters below it on that lunar surface. So here's the process of that. We capture images with a navigation camera on SLIM, and then an extraction software program is performed to actually identify those craters, which are now circled in blue. And then with that pattern of craters, SLIM compares it with its onboard maps, which it's got from previous orbiter missions such as Kaguya and from NASA's LRO orbiter. And that crater pattern can actually identify very accurately where it is on the surface. And so in addition to its inertial navigation equipment, it has a much better idea of its location, and then it can autonomously correct to find out where it is. Now in Hayabusa and Hayabusa 2, which were the asteroid explorers led by JAXA, actual people perform the image matching operation as opposed to inbuilt software. But SLIM has the issue that it's not landing on an asteroid, rather it's landing on a moon. And while the moon is much smaller than the Earth, its gravity is much greater than that of an asteroid, and you can't have a slow descent. So as a result, you actually need to do this image matching scheme incredibly fast, otherwise the lunar gravity has just pulled you past the point where it's useful. Now the other factor you've got to consider is that space computers only have about 1/100th of the capacity of their terrestrial counterparts due to the very harsh conditions of space. So as a result, the team had to develop this image matching algorithm that required only a few seconds of processor time, otherwise you'd miss your chance, on equipment that was not cutting edge. And there's no redo on a moon landing. Once you start that descent, that is it. You can't just pull up and start again, unlike on an asteroid. So now we have a look at a couple of the other navigation equipments on board SLIM. The top is the navigation camera. These are two units that are actually placed at different orientations so that SLIM can examine the surface both during the para-descent phase and during the vertical descent phase when the spacecraft is tilted at a different angle. The middle part here is the landing radar. This is an altitude range sensor to measure the altitude and velocity in the direction of the lunar surface during that vertical descent phase. And finally, we have the laser rangefinder, which is much more accurate, and it's used during that final descent to pinpoint the altitude immediately before landing. So once we get to the point of the landing, we're actually landing on something that should be a 15-degree slope, and that's dangerous. It's very difficult to do. So in order to land safely on a fairly steep incline, we actually have this two-step landing system was adopted. And this was developed after copious amounts of simulations, both computer and practical, to find out what's the safest combination for a spacecraft like SLIM so that it doesn't tip over. And the ultimate result was you land on the back legs and then you rock forward, as we saw in the movie, to a stable position. Now the legs of SLIM themselves are actually these 3D printed semicircular aluminium spheres, and they're designed to compress to absorb the impact of SLIM landing on the surface. This is a very compact design because much larger missions would use legs with joints, but SLIM doesn't have the space for that, so they have these very compact, crunchable 3D aluminium spheres. Now just before SLIM lands, it's going to release two lunar excursion vehicles, LEV-1 and LEV-2, and these will be a demonstration of small probe movement technology on the lunar surface environment. So LEV-1 is the bigger of the two, it's 2.1 kilograms, 26 by 40 by 30 centimeters, and LEV-2 is a smaller round ball at 0.25 kilograms. And these two will communicate as follows. The LEV-1 will actually talk directly to the Earth, and it will move through this hopping motion where there is an arm that presses forward onto the lunar surface and it causes the rover to jump. And it has an antenna, so it can communicate its pictures and other information back to the Earth. LEV 2 is smaller. It's going to have wheels because it springs apart from its spherical configuration into these two wheeled parts, and it will send its data via LEV 1 back to the Earth. This is a close-up of the movement of LEV 1. It has this punching arm that pushes down to the lunar surface. Because the moon gravity is very weak, this is actually very effective, and the rover should jump forward a fair distance before coming back down to the moon. And this is LEV 2, also known as SORA-Q, and it starts off in a ball configuration, but once it lands, it actually pops forward, and it has these two modes of motion, this kind of crawl, and also a more butterfly-like motion. And so here we are, designing technology from an era of landing where we can to landing where we want. And if you're feeling worried that you didn't manage to absorb everything that was said, Mori-san will be back to take us through the key points just before we begin descent. So our next guests are members of the private company manufacturing behind the SLIM mission. First we have Okaida Yu, who's from the Mitsubishi Electric Company, sometimes referred to as Melco, and these are the spacecraft system contractors. Okaida-san is based at Kamakura Works, where SLIM was constructed. So Mitsubishi had actually a very tough job, since as we've seen, SLIM needed to be made as lightweight as possible. So if the spacecraft can be made lightweight, like SLIM, then you do have the option of increasing the mass available for possible observation equipment, and also costs such as transportation to the rocket can be kept very low. Such development therefore can lead to more frequent lunar and planetary exploration in the future. So this is why a lightweight mission was very important for SLIM, and the challenge of construction was passed at least in part to Melco. So one example of that is that SLIM's tank was a new design because it acted as the body of the spacecraft as well as storing the fuel. This actually meant the tank was more exposed, and various devices had to be attached to the tank exterior. This was a new problem that had to be considered very carefully during the construction. Melco are also the spacecraft systems contractor for one of JAXA's upcoming missions, the Martian Moons Exploration Mission, MMX. MMX will launch in fiscal year 2026 and visit the moons of Mars, Phobos and Deimos. Spacecrafts will land on Phobos and collect a sample from the moon, returning to the Earth in 2031.
はい、岡田さんどうもありがとうございました。はい、続いては
So our next guest is Akagi Kensuke from Takura Tomy. Now, Takura Tomy is very well known, but not for spacecraft. It's most well known for being a Japanese toy maker company. The company is perhaps most famous for originally creating the Transformers, the alien robots that can disguise themselves as machines. However, in this case, Takura Tomy have built LEV 2, as seen here. It's a tiny little robot, also known as SORA-Q, and it's one of the rovers on the SLIM mission. And LEV 2 does indeed transform into the second image that you can see that Shin is holding. The rover is about the size of a baseball. It has a honeycomb aluminium alloy shell and starts off as a sphere, as you can see from Akaki-san's model that he's holding. And it then splits in half to reveal a pair of cameras that point front and back. And the two hemispheres actually become the rover wheels. So this little transforming robot will photograph the SLIM spacecraft and also the surrounding terrain before sending those images back via LEV 1 to the Earth. That's the front-forming cameras. And at the back it's even got a little tail for balance.
So the first part was from the toy of the transformer. So it's called a transformation technique that it has been developing. And the second one is this.
研究してきました。ウミガメがこう卵を産んでですね、その後こう海に行くような動き方、この砂の動き方を参考にしていると、普段こう
So imagine that the sea turtles move on the shore and they're inspired by the movements and then they try to capture and then try to have that mechanism embedded.
So what I'm hearing is this is a transformer sea turtle.
Yes, that's right.
That's wonderful.
考え方の特徴であるとか、その思考の柔軟性っていったところですか、こういうものは空球レブ2の開発のどういった部分に生かされてるみたいなのがあるでしょうか。
そうですね。やっぱりこの空球を作っていく中では、このおもちゃの技術を入れていくこととか、皆さんの周りにも人大好きなおもちゃが月でも活躍するかもしれないなと思うと、こう普通の考え方というよりかですね、ちょっとこうぶっ飛んだ考え方。
It looks like this has been really creative process to invent this sort of toy, and is that right? And then he thinks that this is because of the company's strengths that the toy has been made into the space.
Excellent. And toys like Transformers are incredibly imaginative, so maybe this is a more logical step than we might have previously considered.
And it is unique.
It is unique.
はい、続いてのゲストをご紹介しましょう。はい、どうぞ。
So our next guest is Murata Tomakatsu from the Graduate School of Science in the University of Tokyo.